Hi, everybody. Welcome to the OFM Podcast, where metabolic health and performance matter. If you don't know about me, I'm Peter Defty, your host, the pioneer of an approach to metabolic health and fitness called optimized fat metabolism. And today I have one of my early adopters on, Dr. Johnathan Edwards. Johnathan, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Peter. It's good. Yeah.
We've needed to have this podcast forever because we've had it, but now we're finally here. So Johnathan, to establish who you are, you're not just a medical doctor, you do sports medicine, you do anesthesia. So tell us a little bit about your qualifications and just how far across the map you are, including the latest developments that you just shared with me about where you're taking yourself.
Sure. Yep. I was, just to start from, I guess, the beginning, I was as a young boy, I was an aspiring professional motocross athlete. I basically got there when I kept racing at a very high level until I was about 19, at which time, I just, broke my body enough to realize that, going to school was the better way and path forward. Because in those days you didn't have all the sponsors you do now in motocross. So then I, found out I was good at studying, and I went through a community college, and then I went to UC Davis. I studied physiology, where, I got into VO2 max testing and real physiology, then got into medical school at Eastern Virginia Medical School. And, be part of, I guess, the key segues, being a former professional athlete and going to medical school really inspired me to learn as much as I could about nutrition and metabolism and chronic disease and injuries and all that kind of thing, where I can say most of my colleagues had no idea, and as you know, the nutrition background and education you get is only in rare metabolic diseases, glycogen storage and all that, storage diseases, cardles, and these off the ball things. Nobody goes over, like what you do, optimized fat metabolism. No, maybe nowadays medical students are getting into that, but I can tell you in my day, that wasn't even a thing. So
yeah. Ketosis, a ketogenic diet was only used for grand mal seizures and that sort of thing.
Not even then. When I was in the early 90s in medical school, IV ketones were known, but using a ketogenic approach to seizure management was hardly even a concept. It became became later, which we'll get into, and then another foray. After I knew I was going to pass medical school, I actually got back into motocross racing, did a little pro racing again. And then, but more than anything, I got into bicycle racing because I used to, and I left out the fact that when I was at Victor Valley Junior College, I was a collegiate runner. And, I used to run about I think 2:38 was my PR for a marathon. And so, but with an injured knee, I couldn't keep marathon running or, long distance running. I could still book a sub 16 5K, which is still not bad. But then I got into bicycle racing and I really fell in love with it. And through the end of medical school and my residency, which is anesthesia, I went into anesthesiology, which consisted of internal medicine. I actually did a year of sports medicine, and I actually did a year of neurology in France. And then I did anesthesia for 3 years. I raced bicycles all through that. And I just worked my way up from just a recreational racer all the way up to Cat 1, and if you want to Cat 1 bicycle racing, which I found myself racing against the likes of Floyd Landis and other Tour de France riders, Christophe Laporte, when I raced in France a little bit. Certainly I'm not at that level. I was able to compete and be in the same peloton as them, So I guess Cat 1 racing is, a Division 1 NCAA level, and then after that you have pro. And so I reached that, and I think that's when we met. I was racing and I had a big accident. I fell on my head at about 40 miles an hour. Had double vision, and then I knew I was going to go on a ketogenic diet because I knew that helped brain injury. And that's, again, it was in its infancy. And, I think that's how we got connected.
What year was that? Was that 2012 or 13?
8 or 9, I think. Yeah.
8 or 9 is when you had the accident. Okay.
Yeah.
Then we met a year or two after that, because it was when you gotten over the TBI, back,
right,
occupationally fit, you got back on the bike, and that's when you discovered the
right.
limitations of ketogenic.
Yeah. And I was a very high carb athlete before that, racing at that level. And then I decided, nope, I'm going to stick with this keto, this kind of lower carb lifestyle. And I incorporated it into the racing, and, you're quick to find out, the attacks and the very high intensity VO2 efforts, are not the same. And I was like, well, I'm going to figure this out. There's got to be a way. And that's, that's when we started I started reaching out to people like you, and that's that's how I got introduced to it.
Yeah. And as you found out, it works. Let's also flesh out some of your experience, because you were the team doctor for the Paris-Dakar rally when it was running from Paris to Dakar.
Yeah.
The motorcyclists.
Yeah. All my sports medicine activities. I was 5 years on the US Red Bull KTM Dakar rally team while it was in Africa. So yeah, I have an amazing amount of experience from being in Africa and seeing remote parts of the world and treating these athletes day in, day out.
Plus trauma care, right? There was probably some incidents of trauma, not just with the athletes.
Yeah, there was trauma.
I've heard during those days in the Paris-Dakar, it was the Wild West, and
there was a lot of deaths. They had a couple of people pass each year, and it's been criticized, especially by the Vatican, for those things, but it's, I don't know, there's a whole philosophy of the Dakar rally, and just to give you a little prelude, I've written about it, it's the highest form of play you can achieve as an adult, so to speak, and it kind of just puts you back into what it means to be one with, your world and away from, it doesn't get any more real than that when somebody puts you in a playground with rules, and it's called the Dakar rally. And anyway, it's a whole nother discussion, and I'm writing a book about it. And I posted some on my Substack about it, and then beyond that, I've been the team doctor for AG2R cycling team, Flyvia Australia, Champion Systems, and some others. I'm also been the consultant sports medicine optimization doctor for athletes, Misha Tate, Francis Ngannou, TJ Dillashaw, in motocross. I helped Zach Osborne for many years since he was a kid, all the way up into his championships, and I've helped some tennis pros, Colin Altamonaro, and some others. And then nowadays in motocross, I'm helping the French guys, Dylan Ferrandis, Tom Vial. And then, I get so many requests just, to help here and there. And, but that's, so I still always have my hand in it. And then my latest thing is, I'm going to tailor back my, anesthesia career, and I'm going to start my PhD at the University of Paris, testing the effect of VO2 max on EEG signals, and basically kind of define what the VO2 max of the brain is. And I'm doing that with the Professor Veronique Balat, who I wrote a book, the I wrote this book.
Yeah.
The Science of the Marathon, and she's a genius. And we've been on the podcast together with Zach Bitter, for example, on human performance outliers, and that went very well. And she's had some other people. The impact of her research, of Dr. Balat's research, is very high, and it's goes into the variable pace training, which we'll get into in a bit. So, but I think that's a pretty good foray of, I live here in Florida and part-time in France, and that's it.
Yeah, well, good. So we established that you're the real deal, and you're living it too. I mean, you stay fit.
Yeah. Yep.
You ride your bike a lot, especially when you're in France. You play tennis, you run a little bit as your knee will allow.
Exactly.
And you're a big advocate of the approach we're using, including the Vespa product. So
yeah, it works.
Yeah. So today I want to have a conversation, because we've worked with some real high level cyclists at the pro level, at the Grand Tour level.
Yeah.
We helped get Roman Bardet to second on the podium in 2015 or I can't remember the year.
Yeah. So about then. Yeah.
Yeah. And so using this approach of what I call establishing foundational fitness by optimizing your fat metabolism. And so what I want to get is have a conversation with you as a medical person. We're both reading the basic research on what's becoming clear, and have a cogent conversation on what those unintended consequences of overconsumption of concentrated forms of carbohydrates are, because there needs to be a balance in the sports nutrition across the board, not just endurance sports, but even in team sports. We've in the last 5 years, because of these new formulations of hydrogels, the sodium bicarbonate stuff that can transit the stomach, we're seeing these huge performance gains on what I call hyper high carbohydrate fueling and nutrition. And there needs to be a balance to that the general audience can hear, so that they understand, they're fully informed, right? Because all you're hearing right now is this is what the pros are doing, and the inference is you might want to try it yourself, or this is what the pros do it to win. And we all want to win, whether it's winning our age group, winning against our buddies, or winning in life, and we want to be the best versions of ourselves. But there's no balance of disclaimer of what's going on here.
Right. Yeah. So that's a very good segue into, we just listened to the podcast and Human Performance Outliers with Zach Bitter and David Roach, and they were talking about some of the high carbohydrate fueling strategies they even do in ultras. I know a bit about that, but where I really know it is I see it in the cycling. I still keep in touch with many high level cycling coaches and the athletes. And it's, I think you should start off with, it's uncanny how fast the cyclists are going nowadays. I mean, they're breaking records left and right. And, I mean, there's no evidence of foul play, with the doping. There used to be, in the early 2000s and 90s. I mean, we just had Pogacar do the Giro, win the Giro, win the Tour de France. That hasn't been done since Pantani did it in the late 90s, when he was, on EPO, obviously. But it's hard to say. I mean, and then you're just seeing these records, like these guys, just pushing incredible watts for the last hour of a 5-hour race. And so in cycling, point is, and you ask the coaches, and they say, oh yeah, the only thing that's really changed is just some more precise training protocols, and we're pushing carbohydrates, at the level of 120 to 140 grams an hour. And you're just, whoa. And I mean, you have to go back. The Italians have been doing that forever. They kind of know, what works but I think you have to it's so important to put it in the context of why they're doing this and how they're doing this and who this works in. Number one, you got to add, these cyclists are used to pedaling, 3 to 6 hours a day. They ride, in miles per hour, they're riding 22 to 24 mile an hour averages. They're just capable machines of pushing way higher oxidative forms of metabolism than 99% of the people out there. They're all fat adapted. I don't care if you're a professional athlete, especially a cyclist, you are fat adapted by definition. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it. They totally efficiently use their fat, especially when they're at sub threshold powers or speeds or heart rates, however you want to do it. So they're just a different machine altogether. But I think I've been in the team, I've seen cyclists at a professional level since 2007, 8 kind of thing. And I've seen many of my athletes, who they eat a ton, they're drinking their calories a lot. You can get away with so much when you're racing, and then you see them after their careers. And, I've seen many become obese, in a sense, become insulin resistant or glucose insensitive, and they gain weight, they get pre-diabetes, if not diabetes. Part of it is because they try to think they can live the same way and they can't. I saw several cyclists who this was the result. And back then in 2008, 2010, 2012, they weren't pushing this narrative of 120, 30, 40 grams per hour, at all costs. And now they are. And you got to ask, well, what's the long-term consequence? I mean, we know sugar can be bad for anybody, but can it be bad for athletes? And everybody, and I ask all the trainers this, I go, well, what do you think the long-term consequences of that are? And they just all don't care, really. They just care about the here and now. But what's going to happen, 2, 5, 10 years after their careers are done, and 100%, if they keep up that kind of sugar consumption, you're going to get disease. We know that from several studies of just intake of sugar, period. Intake of sugar leads to insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is a prime mechanism for developing things like inflammation in your joints, chronic disease, atherosclerosis, sclerotic disease, Alzheimer's, dementia. All those things come with, excess sugar consumption. And so, yeah, maybe. So, I get it. So the high sugar intakes in the person who's pushing a high enough oxidative metabolism level is going to get a better performance. We've known that for many years. I mean, there's no question of that. And now they're just being more diligent about it. But I fear for the 99% of athletes who aren't in that, say, metabolic fitness or optimized metabolism level, and they're looking at these news reports and training methods going, maybe we should do that too. A master's race, somebody who's going to a master's race that's 50, 60 miles of, it's a 2 to 3 hour race maybe, and the intensity is nowhere near what you would see at a professional level, and they're going to start fueling this. That's just a setup for disease. There's no question in my mind that, you're going to see more insulin and diabetes and pre-diabetes in these recreational athletes who try to
mimic what's
copy. Yeah. So I mean, so that's where I try to, I'm trying to shout from the rooftops. If you're not a professional athlete, doing especially OFM and another, just basically staying low on the carbs and processed foods, and make sure you get the right amino acids, and from nutrition, of course. That's where it's at. So yeah, I think it's a discussion that people need to have, and there's very few people talking about it, and there's no studies on this. Nobody's really looking at this or asking those hard questions. I think.
I think if somebody's, the problem is people aren't connecting the dots, because like, you have David Roche's wife is a doctor at Stanford. She's a physician. She's actually she's actually part of an initiative to help women's health in sports.
Yeah.
So, we tend, what I call the modern human construct, we tend to compartmentalize things. And so you got the sports performance science here pushing the carbohydrates to get the performance, but they're not making the connection to the general population basic research that shows that, too much sugar is going to cause all these chronic diseases and all that. So, one of the things, and I'll say this right now, is, part of our OFM thing is we consider concentrated forms of carbohydrates as a legal PED, because they enhance performance, right? But they have the same definition of a PED, the ones that you can't use.
Yeah.
Do they enhance performance? Yes, absolutely. But are they addictive? Right? Sugar is right.
Yeah.
Are there long-term consequences for overuse of it? Right. So that's why we use, those carbohydrates very strategically, both in diet and diet training and competition, because, I think when you're building your metabolic capacity, you can have those, and they can actually have more benefit than deficit, because having the carbs, having that ability to push yourself higher levels is actually very adaptive, right?
Yeah.
And you need that, as we've all know, but the keto crowd won't talk about, each of the tribes on both ends won't talk about the negatives, but they don't want to talk about the fact that if you stay chronic keto, you downregulate your pyruvate dehydrogenase pathway, and then you can't access the carbs even if you bring them in, and you basically turn the governor down to where your performance is very limited. And so it's not that's the problem I see with ketogenic diet. Is it a good place to start? Absolutely, to get your base back, but it's hard to build your metabolic capacity up after a certain point, because you can't have that push to create the adaptive stress to get stronger, fitter, faster, more robust, and all that. So another thing I wanted to talk about and have you opine on, I'll throw these things out there because you're the doctor, but too much sugar impacts your mitochondria. As we saw in the Western States study in 2012, it impacts your cell wall, fatty acid, lipid bilayer that lines it. A lot of oxidative stress there.
Yep.
Right. You've got lactate load, which is a big topic in sports. And that's what the whole sodium bicarb thing is doing to bypass that. That's a short term.
Right. Yeah, we can go into that. Yeah.
Right. We'll go into that. There's all these things going on, but people need to understand there's things, when you have too much sugar, you have oxidative stress, you have glycation. And that's the thing that I think you and I are seeing We're sitting there seeing this 140 gram an hour stuff, and it's like there has got to be massive glycation going on there to dispose of that glucose. In addition to pushing it into the cells to burn, you've got, and then you've got the lactate production. And as I said, if you're doing this on a chronic basis, not an occasional basis, it's not going to end well. It's not a question of if you're going to have a problem, it's when and what form, right? Because the basic research is pretty clear on that from the general health standards. And I don't think that athletes are devoid of it. And certainly, physical activity is a big mitigator.
So that's So you got to go into more, what happens when you take, these high sugars and glycation happens and all these kind of things. One of the first things that happens, so while you're saying, let's go into, okay, it affects mitochondria. Well, how does it do that? The fat, for example, high sugar intake goes along with fatty liver. And there's not a big threshold for excess calories in general you're going to get fatty liver disease. In fact, it's right now, it's one of the highest, it's overtaken hepatitis. Now it's they call it NASH, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Yeah, non-alcoholic steatosis.
Yeah, steatosis, hepatosis or hepatitis.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's so bad that there's even 10, 11, 12-year-olds who have had to have liver transplants because of this. And it's a crime. It's a crime. I've seen it to see an adolescent, young child have to have a liver transplant because their parents wouldn't stop feeding them, nonstop sugar, crap, fruit drinks and high fructose corn syrups and seed oils and all that kind of stuff, and just nonstop. And and the reason I point that out, because that's the extreme of this high glucose intake of what we see medically. And what we're seeing, in the population in general, now half of the United States, has diabetes or pre-diabetes. Gary Taubes talks a lot about this. Nina Ty-Colts on their Substack, and in books and if you want, they kind of in the mainstream, media, so to speak. But so sugar intake, and so leads to fatty liver, and that fatty liver leads to, lipid oxidation problems, accumulation of triglycerides, and that in turn goes to the mitochondria and the metabolism, and then you start getting, the tricyclic intermediates, pyruvate dehydrogenase and all that kind of stuff gets downregulated, and and then it also does other things to the mitochondria, the cell wall. So you get water dysregulation, you get, and then you get, you just get basically the density of mitochondria even goes down.
Yeah, you're burning up more matches than you're putting back in, and this is the thing with fat metabolism. True fat metabolism is beta oxidation, right? But as we know, but it's not studied because it's difficult to measure, right? That's why ketones are the proxy, but they're not looking at beta oxidation because ketones get all the research money, unfortunately. But the other thing that's connecting the dots here is when you're in beta oxidation, most of that stuff is packaged in cholesterol particles. And when you're in beta oxidation, there's all this other stuff that going on in terms of cell rebuilding your mitochondria, making hormones that happens through beta oxidation, because cholesterol is being metabolized not only for energy, but for all those building blocks that need, for turnover, cell turnover. Right?
That's, and so you start glycating, all those machinery,
Yep.
All that machinery that exists in the cells. And remember, cells aren't these abstract, permanent things. They're actually very fluid structures that can break in half and break in fours and come back together. And kind of like you see, water micelles or soap, soap bubbles. They can break apart, come back together. They are not these fixed things with walls that we all imagine. The cells, if you really want to learn about cells, read Gerald Pollack's
The Structure of Water.
Cells, Gels. It's cells, gels, and machines, or something like that.
We're going to go down a whole bunch of rabbit holes.
Yeah. But I mean, it's the cell is not what everybody thinks it is.
And then you got potential, zeta potential.
Right. And then you have the electrical difference between the two. And, it is a rabbit hole to go down. But, I like to, people think they know what a cell is and what a mitochondria is. And I mean, unless, that's just where 15 years of, education and dedicating yourself to cell structure and anatomy and physiology come in. And so I like to go, a lot into that, and I mean, if you really want to blow your mind, just go look up what the real mechanism of ATP is. It's really a breakup of energy potential modifying the water structures.
That's correct. And so let me back up and just simplify, because we are going down those rabbit holes. Right? But okay, for the folks out there, pay attention to the word glycation. The acronym for it is AGEs, or aging, because it's when a glucose molecule, when you have excess glucose in circulation, it attaches to various molecules in your body, and hemoglobin is one of those. That's why HbA1c. It's not really a marker for diabetes. It's a marker for it's a proxy to measure glycation of hemoglobin. But if glucose is glycating to hemoglobin, it's glycating to a whole bunch of other things. And that makes it, when you have glucose, because glucose is so easily oxidized, it makes that molecule it's attached to be able to be oxidized. And I'm going to take it just one step forward, because you mentioned seed oils. A lot of these polyunsaturated oils are also easily oxidized. So the combination of a molecule that has polyunsaturates on it from seed oils that the body doesn't really know how to metabolize really well, so it floats around something with a glucose molecule glycating to that molecule, that makes for an inflammatory IED for your body.
Yeah, that's what, and that's what causes, that's mainly the cause of, inflammatory atherosclerosis.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if that combination is also probably related to dementia and Alzheimer's.
No, don't be surprised. It is.
Yeah. Yes.
It is. And I mean, there's zero question that, glucose in products and hyperglycation lead.
Got these polyunsaturates that our bodies evolve to.
Well, and that actually goes into the discussion of the quality of glucose you're consuming. And to get back, to the point of what we're talking about, so great. You're putting in 100, which is hard, by the way, 100 grams per hour. Go try it. Have fun with that. You're going to get some stomach upset, and plan it out. It's not easy. You got to take, hyper concentrated gels. And the point I want to make there is, like, think about the market for these gels. They have to be packaged. They have to be transported. They have to sit on a shelf. They got to be palatable, for consumption. What else goes into those gels to make them not spoil the next day? I mean, to not grow bacteria or fungus, in a petri dish. We all know, that glucose is food for, other acellular and multicellular organisms. But anyway, the point is these things are made like shit, as you say. I mean, when I was in France, those cycling teams were very careful about using the most kind of, natural forms of sugar, which are still sugar, by the way, and they can still do the same damage. But when I see my American athletes, I mean, they're happy drinking taking the goos, and I mean, nobody's making that for your health. They're making it so they can sell a product, and things
you
have
can get
to
that temporary performance hit.
Yeah, and things have to be put in those products in order to have a shelf life. And those things that they put in there are not good for you. And and if they're under a certain amount, they get to hide the fact that those preservative products are even in there. Some of the citrates and all that stuff get hidden. And how do you make those citrates? Well, if you looked at how those citrates are made, you'd never want to take them again. Just like, you would never want to, if you smelled the seed oil when it was pressed, rapeseed, colza, sunflower, whatever, you would puke. They have to be chemically modified just so they can be in a bottle. So when you smell it, they smell neutral. But, things like olive oil, avocado oil, macadamia nut oil, those things, they smell great right out of the press. Because I've done this. I have my own olive trees in France. And I pick kilos of olive oil or olives to make my own olive oil. And that pressed olive oil is nice little bitterness. And I mean, it's like wine, it's the way it should be. Anyway, these seed oils, when you press them, aren't made for human consumption, anyway, and I would argue that these high sugar foods we're taking, and mostly the gels and things like that, there's no way that can be good on a chronic basis for the human body.
Yeah.
There's just no way.
Yeah. And so let me take this one step further. Okay. So the audience understands glycation, glucose attaching to molecules, making that molecule easily oxidizable. These oils that we didn't evolve to process metabolically, right? These commercial seed oils, because of the way they have to make them with super high heat, super high pressure, chemicals, they're not made to do that. And then the next step is if somebody's consuming a high carbohydrate diet, they've hormonally switched their body to prefer carbohydrate because to clear carbohydrate out of the system, right? Because glucose is toxic. You go to that step. If you're more of a carb dependent person, then that combination of glycated polyunsaturated that came from an artificial man-made source it's just asking for trouble. Because say if you had some of those and you were a fat adapted person, your body's better able to process those fats before they float around your system and get glycated. If you're a sugar burner, you're not burning sugar, and you have more of these polyunsaturates in circulation, you have more glucose in circulation, it's going to get glycated and it's going to create huge inflammation, which takes me to the next thing, which I bang on a lot, but since we're in this thing and maybe people haven't seen you, one of my epiphanies before we even met, Johnathan, was I was working with a couple early adopters who I actually interviewed one the other day, John Olson and Jenny Capel and Roxanne Woodhouse. These were at that time, they were elite ultra runners, and they were having serious GI tract issues. Serious. I mean, they were pukers, which is common in ultra running and triathlon. And my epiphany came, and this is related to this whole glycation, was when I started to look at the basic literature, and Steve Finney got me started on this because he was talking about the epithelial cells that line your GI tract. You got your epithelial cells that line your GI tract. You got your endothelial cells that line your cardiovasculature, correct? You're an anesthesiologist. So these are cells that turn over on a weekly basis, and
daily even.
Yeah, daily even, but basically your whole epithelium turns over in the course of a week. And a robust epithelium, the immediate metaphor, it's a brand new shag carpet, right? It's all up and going. I liken it to a tropical rainforest, because when you have that really robust epithelium and mucous membrane that's healthy, you can also house this rich and diverse biome inside it, right? The flora and fauna of a rainforest kind of ecosystem, and that's what it is. Well, chronically taking in a lot of gels when you're running, okay, you're literally burning that rainforest down, because your body, especially the warmer it gets, your body is down-regulating blood flow to that epithelium.
100%, yeah.
Right? So the oxidative stress, the ability to process that sugar aerobically versus anaerobically goes down, and you get all this oxidative stress. If you got some seed oil, guys, you're literally burning that rainforest down and to a stubble, just like the same ecological disaster you see in these rainforests. And then what kind of biome can you house? It's less diverse. It's more tilted towards sugar burning microbes. And then what you see when gastroenteros, you see a lot of people on processed food diets, especially athletes that do this, they end up with this stubble that's very prone to inflammation, triggers the immune system, and also eventually develops into autoimmune system diseases, because, as you know, the biome, that big epithelium, the mucous membrane in that biome, that's your first line defense ahead of your own immune system, because it'll mitigate a lot of those foreign proteins. So that was my first really big epiphany on, I knew that fat adaptation worked for me, but then when I saw what was going on, when I made that connection, reading the papers and thinking about what was going on a digestive basis, I was like, God, these endurance athletes are killing themselves. And so it's not that you can't do it once in a while. It's just that over time you're eroding down that thing. It doesn't have
and now we're seeing guys in ultras and the mountain bike. They're taking a cup of coffee in the morning and then nothing for the next 3 to 4 hours, and they're, it's amazing. It's amazing to where it's come to nowadays. I'll never forget seeing one of your athletes, getting ready. I think they were in the Kennedy 50 or something like that, and they started the morning fasted with a cup of coffee, and that's how they took off from the line. And I was just like, yeah, this is great.
Yeah. So if you can get away with that, digestive load, you're doing your body a huge health service, because this whole thing with glycation and what it does on a cellular basis is huge. So you touched on a good point, but that I wanted to back that up to the glycation part, because we were starting to go down some deep rabbit holes with the structure of cells and all that, and
I'm testing a lot of this microbiome stuff nowadays with the Genova FX 1 and 3 day stool testing, and you get back a plethora of information of all the different, what they call genus of the microbiome, or the bacteria that make up the microbiome. And man, you get some neat information, especially when it comes to SIBO and what bacterial infections and things like this. It's really one of the state-of-the-art tests that you can do. That I think if you're suffering from GI distress chronically, it's a neat test to do on somebody.
Tool. Yeah. But it's like you got to get your. What happens if people are fueling on high carb, which is what's being promoted. If they do that on a chronic basis in their training and their racing or competitions, what I described about burning that rainforest down and shifting the biome and reducing the biome, it's going to happen over time. And I've seen way too many athletes in endurance sports have this occur. There'll be phenoms, they'll come on the scene, and to race at that level is, as David Roach so elegantly put out, at that level, if you're a carb burner, you need to be ingesting that level of carbs to sustain that. But once you aren't putting out that level, that amount of carbs isn't doing anybody any favors.
Yep. Yeah. That's, and there's so, in the, and there's so people who have good motors, and they can function at that. They just have other oxidative machinery than, the rest of the, mere mortals will say. And it, and it takes a long time to develop the machinery to burn those kind of nutrients. It's hours and hours and hours of, variable pace training, zone 2 training, getting your, as Roche says, your strides in, which basically he's just talking about variable pace training.
Well, and another big level is doing selective altitude training, right?
And that's without altitude training, nobody would be where they are in cycling right now. I can tell you that.
No, we saw that with the data I pulled a couple of years ago with my athletes. The two guys that were able to sustain, they could run, the two people who could run all day long at 1.5 grams of fat oxidation.
Yeah.
Literally. And they could sustain 20 minutes of above 2 grams a minute fat oxidation. They lived in flag.
So let's put that into perspective. 1.5 to 2 grams of fat oxidation. Normally most people struggle to even burn half a gram, right? Yeah. I mean, just put that in perspective. I think it's a very underappreciated concept.
Yeah, and people need to know. Remember, if you're burning carbs, it's 4 calories per gram. If you're burning fat, it can be over 9 grams of fat, because if you're burning saturated fat, it's probably closer to 10 calories a gram.
Yeah.
And so, but those two guys, Peter Mortimer and Jeff Browning, they're full-blown OFM. They're on the Vespa, but they're also training. They live at 7,000 feet. So they train at 7,000 feet up to 11 or 12,000 feet. They go down to sea level. I'm a big fan of, just like variable pace training, I also do variable altitude. So they'll do a lot of stuff at altitude, but then I'll have them go down to low altitude and do intervals and tempo, because now they can really pour the coal to themselves. Because it's like having a turbocharger on when you come down.
So I mean, as a coach, why don't you think Jeff does? He used to be a high carb intake athlete, and he switched, right?
Both Peter and Jeff were high carb, and they were having GI issues.
So the main thing for them was GI issues. Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff had developed candida. It's gotten so bad. So, right, because your biome is bacteria, archaea, and fungi. And, as you know,
that's the definition of mitochondrial damage when you get candida, It all goes,
right. And because
in step with each other. Yeah.
Right. And because candida is a fungi, which means it's a eukaryote cell, it's our cell. So treating it, we've talked about the nuclear option with fluconazole, which actually sets your own mitochondria back in the process of ridding it. But it's also about getting your biome back in shape to where the bacteria and the archaea can control the candida.
Yeah, fluconazole, that's just the nuclear. That's a chemotherapeutic agent. It really is.
Yeah, exactly. It's the nuclear option.
Yeah. I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen it in action. So. That's interesting. Yeah, those guys. But what would they? It's interesting. So how I guess another question to keep on our theme is, how are these high carb guys doing, say, 140 grams an hour I mean, they have to be on the threshold of GI stress. You know, you have to train it. You have to train your body to accept that many grams of glucose. And they'll only, I don't know, and there's a couple forms of carbohydrates that I've found are easier on the digestive system, just in personal use. The Moretin gels, for example, seem to be a little better. You know, I'm not, you got to find in my experience, every cyclist that I work with found what worked for them. And it was not the same for everybody. They all found different. Some it would be like honey and and natural fruit juices mixed with water. They would use things like that, like a typical
some people did. Some people do fine on maltodextrin.
Right? Yeah, they do on the most horribly produced forms of carbohydrate. Some people can do fine on it. Yeah, it's amazing.
No, I know, and it is amazing.
We don't know why either. Nobody really has really discerned why that is, but it's a question. It'll be a hard one to answer, but it's just a fact. Some people can do it.
Well, and this is something important for the audience to understand is cellular biology, ATP production. It's all pretty well laid out. So we're all the same, but we're all different. And what makes us different, we're all the same physiologically in terms of those processes. They're all well documented. Nobody argues about them. However, it's what I call that last mile. That last mile is those individual variations. I mean, were you born vaginally versus C-section? Did you have a lot of antibiotics at some point in your life, right?
Even the childhood stress, like you asked in your questionnaire, I mean, if you got bad childhood trauma,
all that, carry that forward.
You carry it forward. There's zero question that affects you.
Right. I say, chronic stress is as big a deal as too many carbs.
Actually that's funny. I go into that in my Revolutionary Ketamine book, and with Misha Tate, is it the fact all that anger and trauma and you carry, does that give you a competitive edge or not? And some athletes it's true, because I give some athletes ketamine, and for some athletes it's true, but for other athletes it's a crutch. It's what angers them and I mean fuels their will to power, their that Nietzschean type. What's their mechanism for increasing their own inner success? It's the will to power, and it's really should anyway, I'll just go with that. Some people use their anger for that, healthy or not, that's what gets them there.
Yeah. And, as a biologist, I always go back to this is, we humans on this earth, and this is why we need spirituality. We humans on this earth are in fact animals at our basis, but we have this human twist that can either go really wrong or really right. And you're right, that inner rage and then what that does to you in terms of hormonal hardwiring, and that how that affects your metabolism, right, is huge. So while we're talking about the stomach and GI tract, let's touch on this whole thing with the latest development in hyper high carb fueling, which is Morton's development of a bicarb that can actually get to the small intestine. This is
so that's the latest thing. The Wall Street Journal, you saw the Canadian runner who had a lot of success in this in the Olympics. He claims that by taking the high dose of bicarb, that helped him achieve this Olympic result. And I was actually talking to Brenda Martinez's husband, Carlos Handler. He's her coach. She's a multi-time Olympian in the 800 and 3,000 meter, I believe. And I've worked with her throughout her career. And he and I discussed it, and all bicarb is nothing new. Cyclists and time trials have been using bicarb forever. I mean, and part of the protocol, you talk about GI distress, most of the protocols say start 3 to 4 hours prior to your time trial, take, almost, a gram, 500, a half a gram to a gram or more every 15 minutes leading up to 1 hour before your event, and taking it while you're doing your warm-up. I also have motocross athletes on these protocols, and yeah, it alkalizes the more than just the blood, because it alkalinizes the cells, and you got to remember there's a lot of acid-based physiology going on there that why you do the bicarb, and there's many studies that show it works, not many studies showing cellularly what's really going on. I'd be
Yeah, and I think
that.
I think it's covering up what's happening on a cell wall mitochondrial level, because okay, let me go back and resimplify this for the audience, because we're talking about acid and alkalizing. Okay, people need to keep in mind that you don't go acidic, you don't go basic, because there's all this popular health spheres talking about that. You're putting an acid load or an alkaline load in, and then it's immediately buffered. Your body has these protective mechanisms to keep the pH at the right one, because if you got too acid or too alkaline, you're dead.
Yeah, that's the whole myth. Yeah, I don't know why people think, oh, I got to be alkaline. Yeah, no, you don't. You just it's called homeostasis for
exactly. And so what's happening here, and I'll lead up to this, and you can comment, is if you're burning a lot of sugar at a high level, you're producing a lot of lactate. Now, lactate at a certain level is not only benign, but your heart, your liver, your kidneys can deal with lactate just fine, and even use it as an energy source.
Right.
Right. But it's rate limited. And after that rate is exceeded, you start to accumulate lactate in the blood, which puts on a acid load that's buffered, and the
cells. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And this sodium bicarb is adding extra
Base.
alkaline buffers, to buffer that load, so you can handle a higher load. Now, what we're doing at OFM, you, I, and the athletes we collaborate with, we're taking a little different approach. Not that you can't use that, but it's like, let's first try to control the lactate you're producing.
I mean, there's two things there. In my experience, I've used bicarbonates in the past, and in my experience, when they're used right, it's hard to use it right. Most people who use it they don't really get it. But when you do a long enough loading protocol and you do it correctly, basically what happens at VO2 max is it doesn't increase your power. The studies, conclude that you don't really increase your power output per se, but mentally, when you get to that pain threshold, you can handle that pain threshold a bit longer than if you hadn't taken the bicarbonate. And it's kind of weird. It's just a cerebral thing almost. It just lets you stay at some pain threshold you probably wouldn't stay at quite as long. And that's, I think, the best way to explain the bicarbonate effect. So in, sprinters that spend, 70 to 80% of their race at VO2 max, like, Usain Bolt and, Brenda Martinez, and in these sprint races, that makes a huge difference. In time trials, it makes a huge difference for shorter time trials. I don't know, I'd have to look at the literature on longer ones, but, for really high sprint and track racing,
pure anaerobic,
it makes that difference of, in cycling, it makes a big difference, because anytime you can make just a small difference in cycling, you get results, and anytime you get a small difference in running or ultra running, it doesn't make that big of a difference. it makes, I mean, I'll back up fine. 100 meters, 200 meters, short distance, absolutely. Small gains produce large results. In cycling, people are winning by seconds, after 20 hours of racing. All that makes a difference, but in the longer races and recreational races, it's hard to say if the bicarbonate loading really, is worth the squeeze. Hard to say. I think it's a good marketing deal, but that's my take on it.
Well, and I think that probably, when I'm starting to think about how bicarbonate, is buffering that acid load, it's probably very similar to maybe another topic we'll talk on, which is caffeine, where it's not really doing anything on a mitochondrial cell wall level, but it's like caffeine doesn't really stop you from being tired. It just stops your body from telling you you're tired, right? It's that what does Noakes call it, the internal governor,
right? Yeah, it starts affecting, the EEG signal of VO2 max, which is
right,
yet to be elucidated.
And that's something you're going to be researching on. And so these are the important things. I think that this is also what we're seeing right now. In the last 4 or 5 months, we've started to play with the combination of OFM, Vespa, strategic carbs, and then ketone esters during exercise. Because right now the current thing is ketone esters can be very dicey in exercise. They can tank you more easily than they can not tank you, but we're talking about people who are not fat adapted to that 1 gram, 2 gram level. They're more the 1/2 to 3/4 of a gram. And so what we're seeing, go ahead.
I say, we'll get into ketones on another discussion, because that deserves its own hour.
Right. But what we're seeing, just so for you and the audience briefly, is we're seeing when you're fat adapted, you're using Vespa, a little bit of carbs, that we're doing some microdosing of ketones. Well, once the switch is on, the physiological switch is on, and it doesn't get, just you're saying, with the bicarbonate, it doesn't make your output, your power, your pace go up.
Nope.
But the ability to hold that pace significantly longer is what we're seeing right now. And we've got it down to where over several athletes, it's been consistent, high level athletes, Cat 1 cyclists. And then this last experiment we just concluded with John Rutherford, where he rode the Badlands 800 and snuck into 10th place overall in his first Badlands attempt. He said he wrote me immediately back, nutrition was zero issue. Spot on.
He did the Vespa ketones and carbohydrates.
He's one of my early adopters. I started working with him in 2010, and he's very precise. I mean,
he was one of the high fat burners too. He had a really high.
He had the highest
for a long time.
Yeah. Now, Peter and Jeff stuff, it blows everybody out of the water, because they're 2 grams for 20 minutes. It's like going up to like 2.4 grams a minute peaking. And so you said, again, if we can shift that thing from 1/2 gram to 3/4 of a gram up to a gram and a half as an all-day fueling thing, all of a sudden, what does that do to the lactate? Brings it way down.
Yep.
And I think that's just been except for what we're doing, it's been unexplored.
Right. Yeah. Well, a lot of stuff. Yeah, we got lot things, a lot of to discuss here. So.
yeah. So tell us about your. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things as we move forward, but tell us about what your latest project is.
Yeah, just like we kind of touched on it. It's just I'm going to start my PhD at the University of Paris. And yes, it's going to be in French and a lot in English, but I
Well,
speak
you're a bona fide Francophile. I know.
Yeah, I speak the language, so
You're a total Francophile. Let's just admit that. I mean, you got the house in France. You love the French food. You love speaking the language, and there's nothing wrong with it. I just
yeah, it's
love to
true.
see that. I mean, I'm sure your wife jokes with you about it a little bit, and sometimes rolls her eyes with the level of
Yeah, that's true. I did take it to another level. I mean, I studied over there, and but I really learned the language. It was just one of those things that it just, I wanted to be understood, and so while I was living there, so I worked my hardest to learn the accent, grammar, everything, and it just, it's opened a lot of doors for me. That's for sure.
Yeah, so you're doing research on EEG, right? VO2 max and EEG and how that affects the brain.
Yep. Yeah. So I've had the opportunity to, go to the University of Paris under a couple of doctors. One is Dr. Veronique Balat, who I know, I wrote the book with, and then also Dr. Olivier Romain or Roma. And so, those two they have a lot of research, and yeah, it's going to be a new stage of my career. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. And it's neat doing your PhD. Allows you to think, and it's almost like philosophy in a way. And yeah, and to be able to do that in Paris is should be pretty cool. And I'm looking forward to that. And then yeah, we're gonna test mainly higher level cyclists and see what their EEG looks like at different levels of near VO2 max using the variable pace training protocols, and what the EEG looks like at VO2 max, which is not really well discerned. And we'll see what we find, and that's going to hopefully be published research and a PhD dissertation.
Fantastic. And then another place people can find you is you've written a couple books on ketamine therapy, because ketamine is a very old anesthetic that's got other therapeutic properties. And just briefly talk about that, because they're in the news lately, but not in a good way. Misunderstood way.
Misunderstood way. Yeah, it's no, ketamine is something I've been using in anesthesiology for 25 years. Most people don't realize that it's a drug that has been around for a long time. It's safe when given in the right hands, the right environment. It can stop suicide. I did a whole speak event, TED Talk type on that subject that's you can easily search. And yeah, it's a drug with many advantages and has helped thousands of people. And it's a shame that we're seeing it abused in the media right now, and by how things it's led to with Matthew Perry and all that. And I write about that on my Substack, Johnathan Edwards MD .substack.com. You can see everything I've written there, and I write about a potpourri of things, from VO2 max training, ketamine, and some other chronic pain procedures called percutaneous hydrotomy. And yeah, so you can find a lot more on that, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah. So anyway, Johnathan, thanks for being part of my team and collaborating with us. Hopefully we can do even more as we start to get traction, which I think we're starting to get. But this high carb distraction kind of comes on the tail end of the keto distraction. And it's like, people don't understand what we're doing, so they put us in the keto camp. So right now,
well, one narrative ends and another begins, right?
Oh man, you said a mouthful right there. Yeah, and that's the problem, is there's not enough discussion, and I was really impressed with that podcast Zach did. Zach was one of my early adopters, right?
Yeah.
That Zach did with David Roche, because David wrote an article in the feed about the high carb revolution and it was promotion. But then when Zach had this podcast, they talked about the nuance and that, and all of a sudden here's David doing fasted runs and talking about he can do 2 4-hour fasted runs.
Yep.
Just like cyclists do fasted long rides early in the season, right?
Oh yeah.
And there's some fat adapted strategies in there. They're just not taking it to the level we're doing it. But I think the misunderstanding, because of course you adopted it because when you were looking for that alternative, you wanted to stay on a fat adapted approach, but you weren't willing to sacrifice the performance, and you found that combination with OFM and the Vespa product.
Yep. Yeah. Then eventually the ketones and all that. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. And what we're seeing with the ketones, like I said, that's something we should schedule for another conversation, because I think I've got probably a dozen athletes I'm working with right now, working with Frank Yosa at Ketone Aid, who I love working with him because he's a small guy, small business. He's like me. He's totally honest about what it is. He doesn't tell people to overuse ketones. He's not hyping it up.
Yep.
He's trying to get good advice based on what he's seeing. But thanks to him donating some samples and giving us some input, we've actually come up with some pretty strong protocols that we'll have to have a conversation of, so that we can start getting it into people's hands at all levels, because it really is, if people are considering using ketones, it really seems to be working well.
Yep. Yeah, it's a game. It can be a game changer used in the right way, for sure.
Yeah, but it seems to be, like I said, it's that fat adaptation, Vespa, and carbs, and then the ketones during exercise really seems to, if it's going any distance, like one of our guys says, he can keep his head in it. If he can keep his head in it, he can keep going.
Yeah. So cool. I'm about to get on a fasted ride right now myself.
All right, take your Vespa and go out and crush it.
All right, thanks, Peter. All
See you later.
See ya. Thank you.
Bye. All right, that was great. Let's get some more stuff going in about a month or so, whatever your schedule permits. And we'll promote your books and whatever you want as much as we can.
Yeah, I don't think, it's just every little bit helps, just doing I've gotten a lot of podcasts in, though. It's crazy, so it's it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. But we're starting to get a little bit better traction, and we're having a good run in the triathlon sphere right now. I've got a couple of really well-respected coaches on board, and it's starting to percolate through that sphere.
Cool. All right.
So
that's awesome, man. Yeah. We'll have to.
And there's a really good, we're going to use a video for instruction, but there's a good video of a pro triathlete, Lionel Sanders. He's a pro. He's going to Kona, got a Kona slot. And he's talking exactly what we're saying, because he's a pro, and he's saying, I can't do this 120, 140. And he's puking, he's still running a fast.
Yeah.
But he says it just doesn't, everything he's saying is like, it's not working for me. And it's like, yeah, that's because you've been doing this for several years, and it's the chickens are coming home to roost. Just like they did with Jeff Browning.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome, man. Cool. All right, Peter. I'm going to
take care. Good to see you.
All right. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.